The next section that we're going to cover is how to submit your site to the search engines. The easiest and fastest way to get all of your content to show up in the search engines is with an XML sitemap. XML is a language, it's kind of like HTML, except it's really designed for computers to read it rather than people to read it. And XML is, it's just a way to structure the content of a document in a very regimented way. And Google and Yahoo and Microsoft and some other search engines came up with a standard format called a sitemap, an XML sitemap, that they all share so that webmasters everywhere could create one XML sitemap and then be able to submit it to all the different search engines. Now, the great thing about Drupal is that anytime there's a new web standard, a developer sits down and says, hey, I'm going to write a module that makes it very easy for Drupal site owners to submit and use that new standard. And in this case, it's called the XML Sitemaps module. So let's take a look at that. I've gone to my SEO checklist. I'm going to go to the Submit Your Site to the Search Engines tab. You see the XML sitemap module, which of course you'll download, and then I'm going to go to Enable. And I want to actually show you some of the options here because you do have more than one option here with the XML sitemap. Obviously, you're going to need the main one, which is the XML sitemap. The Sitemap Custom allows you to create configurable links to your site that are in your sitemap. I'm going to leave that unchecked, but if you need that, know that that's possible and you can do that. The XML sitemap engines will automatically submit your sitemap and resubmit your sitemap to the engines. I'm going to leave that one off for now, but know that that's an option and you can do that. The XML sitemap menu includes menu items. Now, if you'll remember, we created menu items to point to our content silos. And whether you created those with the taxonomies or you created them with the views module, I think it's a good idea to make sure that all your menu items are showing up in your XML sitemap. So I'm going to turn that one on. And then, of course, I want all my nodes to show up in my XML sitemap, so I'm going to turn that one on as well. And then taxonomies, that's just a great idea. I'm going to turn that one on. If you have a site where a lot of users come in and create their own profiles, like Drupal.org, where there's tens of thousands of user profiles, and you want all those user profiles to show up on the internet, it would be a good idea to click the XML sitemap user, and then you'll include all those users in your sitemap. But since this site doesn't have that, I'm not going to check that off. And then we're going to click Save Configuration. And I'm going to go right back to the SEO checklist, down to my Submit, and go to the Configure link. And there's actually here under Settings, there's actually some things that are pretty useful that we should talk about. The minimum sitemap lifetime, this will tell the cron, which is the method that Drupal uses to regenerate things, will tell it what the minimum lifetime needs to be before it is going to be regenerated. I don't think that there needs to be a minimum set here, so we're just going to leave that with no minimum. That means that it will only regenerate your sitemap when something has actually changed. Include a style sheet in the sitemap for humans, and what that's going to do is an XML sitemap is really kind of, it's a bunch of code. It's hard to look at. And if you include a style sheet, all it does is it says, if you're displaying this in a browser, here's a nicely styled way of looking at the XML sitemap. Does not affect the performance of the sitemap or affect the engines when they come to view your sitemap. So I'm going to leave that one checked. That's a good thing. And then prefetch URL aliases during sitemap generation. I think that this is a great thing and actually will speed up the generation of the XML sitemap, so we're going to leave that alone. I've got some advanced settings here. I'm going to leave those alone, but just be aware that there are some additional settings here for the sitemap. Now, as I go through the different options here, I've got some things that you'll see again and again. One of them is priority, one of them is change frequency. These are sitemap elements that are defined by that standards body, so that you can tell the search engines what you consider the most important parts of your site. Priority 1.0 means that is the most important content that you have on your site. Those are going to be things like your front page, maybe your category pages. These are the pages that Google is going to give priority to the most. So if they're going to spend just a little bit of time on your site, those are the ones that they're going to spend their time on. Also, change frequency. Change frequency will tell them how often you expect that piece of content to change. So, and you always want to set the change frequency as accurately as you can. As you know, if you only change your website once a month, set it to monthly. If you're changing it 2 or 3 times a month, set it to weekly, and they'll come back weekly to check and see if there have been any changes. Now, this doesn't guarantee that the search engines are going to follow that, but certainly Google has said that they try to follow the directives that are included in the sitemap. And keep in mind, this is for the front page. This is a page that's probably going to change pretty often. I'm going to leave that one at daily. Hourly and always, that's really going to produce probably too much traffic from Google continuously looking at and recaching my home page. And for this site, it's a low frequency of change. So I'm going to set it for daily, and that's going to be fine. Now, as I go through here, I can see here are the pieces of content. There are 50 available pieces of content. And so that's a good thing. And I'm going to click Save Configuration. So that means there are 50 pieces of content that are going to be included in my XML sitemap. And I've just generated those 50. They're not articles that we've written or anything like that. But if you have a Drupal site that's been around for a while, you may have hundreds of pages of content that you're going to include in your sitemap. In fact, we had a customer once who had thousands and thousands of products. He did not have an XML sitemap. We installed one on his site, and his traffic, it like quadrupled in about a 2-week period of time, simply because we put an XML sitemap. And we're talking about his traffic went from like 10,000 a month to 40 or 50,000 a month in visitors, simply because all of his pages were now showing up in Google. So XML sitemaps are fantastic, especially for e-commerce sites. Now we've got to run cron, and this is something that you'll need to do to get the XML sitemap to be populated. And I'm going to tell you now that not all the content is going to show up, because there's one more step that we need to do. But I'm going to go ahead and show you what that sitemap looks like. Sitemap.xml. And it's going to show me one piece of content, the front page of my site. And that's because I haven't gone into the content type and set the XML sitemap to include that content type, which I'm going to do now. So let's open up a new tab. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to my content types. I'm going to edit the story, since all my content are the story content type. Notice I now have an XML sitemap, and it is excluded. So I'm going to click that, change that to included, and I can change my default priority. And this is the default that it will use for all story content types. These are I'd probably say that's the majority of my content. I'm just going to leave that at 0.5 as normal. Save that out. I'm going to run the cron again, which will regenerate the sitemap. And then I'm going to go back to the sitemap file, and there's all of my content included in this XML sitemap. And so I can follow each one of these links, and it'll take me to that piece of content. It's working perfectly. It's exactly what I was looking for in an XML sitemap. Now we're going to go and we're going to tell Google, hey, I've created an XML sitemap. Come to my site and pull in that sitemap, index it, and include all my pages in the search index. We've set up, in an earlier part of the video, we've set up Google Webmaster Tools. And if you can't remember how to get to that, just go Google it. Google Webmaster Tools, and it'll give you a nice link. We're already logged in. Our site is already here. Just click on it. And then I'm going to go to Sitemaps on the dashboard, and I'm going to click Submit a Sitemap. And again, Submit a Sitemap. It's going to give me a little field here, sitemap.xml. Now, what I always like to do is copy and paste it, simply because if I type it in wrong, I'm going to be kicking myself later. Alright, submit sitemap. And now it is here. Notice the status is this little time symbol. That means that Google knows about it, but they haven't sent the bot out to grab the sitemap yet. And then it'll tell me when it was downloaded and when it was indexed and things like that. If I want to get an update on this, I can just simply refresh the page, and here in a few minutes it will actually change and show me that the sitemap has been pulled down by Google, and then they'll start to crawl through my website, through all those pages. So as you can see, after I reloaded the page, the Google bot has come, pulled in my sitemap.xml file. It sees that I've submitted 51 different URLs, all in that same website. It was downloaded on August the 5th, and so far it has not gone through and parsed any of those, pulling them into the web index. And that just takes some time. It could be a few days, it could be a few weeks, but eventually all those URLs will be pulled in. If you run a website that produces a lot of news, and you think you should be included in the Google News part of google.com, then you can submit a special kind of XML sitemap that has different elements for news-based sites. If you want to do that, there is a module called the Google News Sitemap that is on Drupal.org, and you can download it and install it on your site. Very similar to the XML sitemap, and in fact I believe in the future they're going to actually merge those modules into one XML sitemap module, and Google News will just be part of that module. But for now it's two separate ones, and if that's something that you feel like you need to do on your site, then that's an option for you. I'm not going to demonstrate it. It's very similar to the XML sitemap, but just know that it's available for you there. Now that we've submitted our site to Google and they've accepted our sitemap, I can go back to my site, go to the SEO checklist module, and we've actually accomplished a lot of things by doing that. Go here to the submit your site to the search engines. It's found that I've already done the site verification, which is great. The XML sitemap module and the sitemap module, which is another sitemap that we're going to discuss in just a minute. We've logged into Google Webmaster Tools. You know that we already authenticated our site with Google, and we submitted our XML sitemap. So we've accomplished all those things, and I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Alright, so there is another kind of sitemap, and actually it's the original kind of sitemap that used to show up on sites, and it's called the user-facing sitemap. A user-facing sitemap is basically showing your users how all of the content on your site is laid out so that they can easily navigate to the parts that they want. This is also useful for search engines that don't accept an XML sitemap. Most of them do now, but you may still occasionally come across an engine that just wants to follow natural links on your site. So providing a sitemap is always a good thing for both users and for the engines. So I've already turned on a module called the Site Space Map module, and what it does for me is it provides just that. It provides a user-facing sitemap. So I'm going to go in here. There's the Site Map module. I'm going to click the Configure link, and I can change the title of it, Sitemap. I can put a message on there. Welcome. Here are our sections. Okay, and then what pages should I show in the sitemap? The front page sounds good. Active blog authors, okay, I don't actually have any, so I'm going to turn that off. I do want the Seekonk Real Estate menu, which is our primary navigation element. I also want the category, which is the taxonomy that I had set up, to show up there, and show all node counts. So that's interesting. You can turn that on or not turn that on. It's not really going to affect things in your for your SEO. And then if you want, you can actually turn the RSS feeds on and show links to all the different RSS feeds that are already available on your Drupal site. And I'm going to leave this one unchecked because I do want a CSS file, and then when I save configuration and run cron to generate that sitemap, now I go to sitemap. There we go. So it's just /sitemap, and you have the different sections of your site all displayed. And the sections that do have an RSS feed, it shows you this little link right there. So that makes it very easy for your users to go and find places where they can subscribe to the content on your site. Now, what I would do here is I would go ahead and take this link, go back to the menu that we had created, which was the Seekonk Real Estate menu, and I'm going to add an item here. The path, easy enough, is sitemap. Menu link is, and I'm just going to call it sitemap. People kind of know what those are. I want the sitemap to show up as the last item in my menu. That's typically where sitemaps go, so I'm going to go ahead and set that to 50. You know what, I'll put it at 48 just in case there's something else that's even less important. And then notice now that I've installed the XML sitemap module, I have an XML sitemap drop down for this menu item. And I can say, hey, this is really important, it's not important, default is excluded, so I'm going to include it. And then I'm going to say, you know what, this is not that important, these are just redundant listings for stuff that are already included in the XML sitemap. So I'm going to put that as low priority. I'm not saying don't crawl it, I'm just saying, you know what, if you get around to it, that's fine. And I'm going to click Save. Okay, I've added it to my menu, and there's just one thing left that I need to do, and that is to give people permission to view the sitemap. So I'm going to go to User Management Permissions, and I'm going to go down to the sitemap section, and I'm going to give everyone permission to access the sitemap module. Save that permission, and now when I go back over to Chrome and I refresh the page, I now have a link to the user-facing sitemap, and I can get to all the major sections of my site. And as I add more and more content to my site, of course this sitemap will continue to get more and more robust. So there you have it. 2 or 3 different kinds of sitemaps will ensure that you're able to push your content out as quickly as possible to the search engines. I know that in the past in Drupal, the sitemap module caused somewhat of a performance hit if you had a very large site, and even for some medium-sized sites with, say, 10,000 nodes, it really would slow down the server. Fortunately, the sitemap module has been completely rewritten from the ground up. If you're using version 2 of the module, which is right at this moment in beta, but it is very stable, it does everything that you would expect it to do, and it's eliminated most of the performance hit that you would take. Of course, when you run cron, it's going to generate a sitemap, but it's very quick, very easy. Always test it, of course, if you have a really massive site, but I think most of those issues have been taken care of. With the power of an XML sitemap, you can really very, very quickly move your site in vast, vast quantities of nodes and pages up in the search engines and generate a lot of traffic to your site.